The Snow Queen. First story, The Mirror and Splinters. Listen to the beginning of this story. When we get to the end, we will know more about a very wicked hobgoblin. He was one of the most mischievous of all sprites, a real demon. Once he was in a merry mood, and he made a mirror. That mirror could make everything good that was reflected in it shrink almost to nothing, while everything bad was magnified. The most lovely landscapes looked like boiled spinach. The people became ugly and looked as if they stood on their heads and had no bodies. Even one freckle on the face appeared to spread over the nose and mouth. How the demon laughed at his cunning invention.
Oh, that's quite amusing. When a good or holy thought passes through the mind of anyone, it looks like a wrinkle in my wonderful mirror.
Little hobgoblins who went to the demon school, for he kept a school, talked everywhere of the wonders they had seen in the mirror.
Now we see what the world and its inhabitants are like, and that's for the first time.
Little hobgoblins carried the glass about everywhere, until at last there was not a land, nor a human who had not been looked at through this distorted mirror.
Look, he's ugly. What a loser. What a fool. Let's fly with it up to heaven. We will laugh at the angels. Yes, let's fly.
The higher little hobgoblins flew, the more slippery the glass became, and they could scarcely hold it. At last, it slipped from their hands. The mirror fell to the earth and was broken into millions of pieces. Now the mirror caused more unhappiness than ever, for some of the fragments were like grains of sand. They flew about the world into every country. When one of these tiny atoms flew into a person's eye, it stuck there. From that moment, that person could see only the worst side of what he looked at, for even the smallest splinter had the same power that the whole mirror. Some persons even got a splinter of the mirror in their hearts.
Oh, how it hurts.
This was terrible, for the hearts of those persons became cold and hard like a lump of ice. A few of the pieces were so large they could be used as window panes. But woe to the one who looked at his friends through such a window.
Oh, they're all ugly liars.
Other pieces were made into spectacles, and this was dreadful, for those who wore them could see nothing either justly. At all this, the wicked demon laughed until his sides shook. There are still a number of these little splinters of glass floating about in the air, and now you will hear what happened with one of them. Second story, A Little Boy and a Little Girl. In a large town full of houses and people, there is no room for even a little garden. Most people content themselves with a few flowers in flower pots. In one of these large towns lived two poor children who had a garden somewhat larger and better than a few flower pots. They were not brother and sister, but they loved each other almost as much as if they had been. Their parents lived opposite each other in two garrets where the roofs of neighboring houses nearly joined each other, and the water pipe ran between them. In each roof was a little window, so that anyone could step from one window to the other.
Good morning.
Good morning.
The parents of these children had a large wooden box in which kitchen vegetables grew, and in each box was a little rose bush. Sweet peas drooped over the boxes, and the rose bushes shot forth long branches, which were clustered together like a triumphal arch of leaves and flowers. The boxes were very high, and the children knew they must not climb upon them without permission. But they often had to leave to step out and sit upon their little stools under the rose bushes or play quietly together. In winter, all this pleasure came to an end, for the windows were sometimes quite frozen over. Then the children would warm copper pennies on the stove and hold them against the frozen pane. There would soon be a little round hole through which they could peep. How the soft bright eyes of the little boy and girl would sparkle then. Their names were Kay and Gerda. In summer, they could be together with one jump from the window, but in winter, they had to go up and down the long staircase and out through the snow before they could meet. One day when it was snowing, Kay's grandmother called them.
Kay, Gerda, see, the white bees are swarming.
Have they a queen bee?
To be sure they have. She is flying there where the swarm is thickest. She is the largest of them all and never remains on the earth, but flies up to the dark clouds. Often at midnight she flies through the streets of the town and breathes with her frosty breath upon the windows. Then the ice freezes on the panes into wonderful forms that look like flowers and castles.
Yes, I've seen them. Can the Snow Queen come in here?
Only let her come. I'll put her on the warm stove and then she'll melt.
That same evening before going to bed, little Kay climbed upon a chair by the window and peeped out through the little round hole.
I should say goodnight to Gerda.
A few flakes of snow were falling, and one of them, rather large than the rest, fell on the edge of one of the flower boxes. Strange to say, this snowflake grew larger and larger until at last it took the form of a woman dressed in white gauze, which looked like millions of starry snowflakes linked together. She was fair and beautiful, but made of glittering, dazzling ice. Still, she was alive, and her eyes sparkled like bright stars, though there was neither peace nor rest in them. She nodded toward the window and waved her hand to the little Kay.
Oh!
The little boy was frightened and sprang from the chair, and at the same moment, it seemed as if a large bird flew by the window. On the following day, there was a clear frost, and very soon came the spring. The sun shone, the young green leaves burst, and the swallows built their nests. Windows were opened, and the children sat once more in the garden on the roof, high above all the other rooms. How beautifully the roses blossomed this summer. Gerda had learned a song in which roses were spoken of, and she sang it to the little boy, and he sang too.
Roses bloom and fade away, but our love will shine always.
Will shine away.
The children held each other by the hand and kissed the roses and looked at the bright sunshine. Those were glorious summer days.
How beautiful and fresh it is among the rose bushes. They look as they would never leave off blooming.
One day, Kay and Gerda sat looking at a book of pictures of animals and birds.
Look, there's the little robin. He likes to hide among the rose bushes.
There's a white bear, too. He's so strong he could easily kill a grown-up man.
Oh, there's something that struck my heart. Sit still. Let me look.
The little girl put her arm around Kay's neck and looked into his eye, but she could see nothing.
I think it's gone.
However, it was not gone. It was one of those bits of the mirror, the ugly glass which made everything great and good appear small and ugly. Poor little Kay had also received a small splinter in his heart, which very quickly turned to a lump of ice. He felt no more pain, but the glass was still there.
Poor Kay, you're hurt.
Why do you cry? It makes you look ugly. There's nothing the matter with me now.
Then he glanced down the roses in the box.
Oh, that rose is worm-eaten, and this one is quite crooked. Ugly roses, just like the box in which they stand.
And then he kicked the boxes with his foot and pulled off the two roses.
Why, Kay, what are you doing?
When Kay saw how grieved Gerda was, he tore off another rose and jumped through his window, away from sweet little Gerda. Kay no longer wanted to play with her.
Kay, look what I've got. A picture book. Let's look at the pictures together.
What's the interest? It is only fit for babies.
When grandmother told stories, he would interrupt her with "but," or sometimes he would get behind her chair, put on a pair of spectacles, and imitate her very cleverly to make the people laugh. By and by, he began to mimic the speech and gait of persons in the street. All that was peculiar or disagreeable in a person he would imitate directly, and people said,
"What an actor! He has a remarkable genius."
But it was the piece of glass in Kay's eye and the coldness in his heart that made him act like this. He would even tease little Gerda, who loved him with all her heart.
Cry, baby, cry, baby.
His games, too, were quite different. One winter's day when it snowed, he brought out a burning glass, held out the skirt of his blue coat, and let the snowflakes fall upon it.
Look in this glass, Gerda.
Little girl saw how every flake of snow was magnified and looked like a beautiful flower or a glittering star.
It's much more interesting than looking at real flowers. There is not a single fault in it. The snowflakes are quite perfect until they begin to melt.
Soon after, Kay ran to Gerda's room in thick gloves and with his sledge at his back.
I've got to leave to go into the great square where the other boys play and ride. Bye.
and away he went. In the great square, the boldest among the boys would often tie their sledges to the wagons of the country people and so get a ride. This was cool. Suddenly, a great sledge came by. It was painted white. In it sat someone wrapped in a white fur and wearing a white cap. The sledge drove twice around the square, and Kay fastened his own little sledge to it and took a ride.
Yahoo! Faster, faster!
It went faster and faster right through the next street. The person who drove turned around and nodded pleasantly to Kay as if they knew each other. Whenever Kay wished to loosen his little sledge, the driver turned and nodded as if he were asking him to stay, so Kay sat still and they drove out through the town gate.
Hey, stop, stop! It's time for me to go home, it's too far.
Then the snow began to fall so heavily that the little boy could not see his hands, but still they drove on. He tried to loosen the cord so that the large sled might go on without him.
Come on, untie!
It was of no use. Kay's sledges held fast, and away they went like the wind.
Stop! Please stop! I want to go home!
Nobody heard him while the snow beat upon him, and the sledge flew onward. Every now and then, it gave a jump as if they were going over hedges and ditches.
Hey, slower! I don't want to fall off!
The boy was frightened and tried to say a prayer, but he could remember nothing but the multiplication table. The snowflakes became larger and larger until they appeared like great white birds. All at once, they sprang on one side and the great sledge stopped. The person who had driven it rose up. The fur and the cap, which were made entirely of snow, fell off, and he saw a lady tall and white. It was the Snow Queen.
We have driven well, but why do you tremble so? Here, creep into my warm fur.
Then she seated him beside her in the sledge, and as she wrapped the fur about him, he felt as if he were sinking into a snowdrift.
Are you still cold?
And she kissed Kay on the forehead. The kiss was colder than ice. It went quite through a boy's heart, which was almost a lump of ice already.
I'm cold. Frozen.
Kay felt as if he was going to die, but only for a moment. He soon seemed quite well and did not notice the cold all around him.
No, I must have imagined it. I'm all right. My sledge! Don't forget my sledge!
There they are, look.
The boy looked and saw that his sledge was bound fast to one of the white birds which flew behind him. The Snow Queen kissed little Kay again, and by this time he had forgotten little Gerda, his grandmother, and all at home.
Now, you must have no more kisses, or I should kiss you to death.
Kay looked at her. She was so beautiful. He could not imagine a more lovely face. She did not now seem to be made of ice, as when he had seen her through his window. In his eyes, she was perfect.
You are so beautiful, and I'm not afraid of you. You know I could do mental fractions. I know the number of square miles and the number of inhabitants in the country.
Snow Queen only smiled on hearing this, and Kay thought that he did not yet know so very much. Meanwhile, they flew higher and higher upon a black cloud, while the storm blew and howled as if it were singing songs of old time. They flew over woods and lakes, over sea and land. Below them roared the wild wind, wolves howled, and the snow crackled. Over them flew the black screaming crows, and above all shone the moon clear and bright. So Kay passed through the long, long winter's night, and by day he slept at the feet of the Snow Queen. Third story, The Enchanted Garden. But how little Gerda lived when Kay was lost. What had become of him, no one knew, nor could anyone give the slightest information, excepting the boys from the square. They said that he had tied his sledge to another very large one, which had driven through the street and out at the town gate. No one knew where it went. Many tears were shed for Kay, and little Gerda wept bitterly for a long time. Finally, they decided that he was drowned in the river close by the school. The long winter days were very dreary, but at last spring came with warm sunshine.
Kay is dead and gone.
And the sunshine argued.
I don't believe it. He is dead and gone.
And little sparrows chirped.
We don't believe it.
At last little Gerda began to doubt it herself.
I will put on my new red shoes, and then I will go down to the river and ask for Kay.
It was quite early when she kissed her old grandmother, who was still asleep. Then she put on her red shoes and went quite alone out of the town gate toward the river.
Bright river, Is it true that you've taken Kay away from me? I will give you my red shoes if you'll give him back.
It seemed as if the waves nodded to her in a strange manner. Then Gerda took off her red shoes, which she liked better than anything else, and threw them both into the river. But the little waves carried them back to land.
I would not take from you what you love best, little girl, for I could not give you back little Kay.
Gerda thought that she didn't throw the shoes far enough, so she crept into a boat that lay among the reeds and threw the shoes again into the water. The boat was not fastened, and her movement sent it gliding away from the land.
No, stop! Don't glide away, wait!
When Gerda run the end of the boat, but already it was more than a yard from the bank and drifting away faster than ever.
I don't know how to swim. How will I return to my grandma?
Little Gerda was very much frightened. She began to cry, but no one heard her except the sparrows.
Chirp, chirp! Here we are! Here we are! We could not carry you to land, but here we are! You're not alone!
The boat floated with the stream, and little Gerda sat quite still with only her stockings on her feet. The red shoes floated after her, but she could not reach them. The banks on either side of the river were very pretty. There were beautiful flowers, old trees, sloping fields in which cows and sheep were grazing.
And not a soul on those beautiful banks. But I won't be sad. Perhaps the river will carry me to little Kay.
And then the girl became more cheerful, raised her head and looked at the beautiful green banks. So the boat sailed on for hours. At length it came to a large cherry orchard in which stood a small house with strange red and blue windows. It had also a thatched roof, and outside there were 2 wooden soldiers that presented arms to her as she sailed past. Gerda called out to them, for she thought they were alive.
Hey, can you please help me? I wish to land.
The soldiers did not answer, and as the boat drifted nearer to the shore, Gerda saw what they really were.
Oh, the wooden figures.
Then Gerda called louder, and there came a very old woman out of the house, leaning on a crutch. She wore a large hat to shade her from the sun, and on it were painted all sorts of pretty flowers.
You poor little child. How did you manage to come this long distance into the wide world on such a rapid rolling stream?
And then the old woman walked into the water, seized the boat with her crutch, drew it to land, and lifted little Gerda out.
You're safe now, little one. Come and tell me who you are and how you came here.
Then Gerda told her everything while the old woman shook her head.
Maybe you've seen little Kay somewhere near your place?
No, my love. He had not passed that way, but he very likely would come. Don't be sad. Come into the house, taste my cherries, and look at the flowers. Each of them could tell a story, you know.
Then she took Gerda by the hand and led her into the little house and closed the door. The windows were very high, and as the panes were red, blue, and yellow, the daylight shone through them in all sorts of colors. On the table stood some beautiful cherries, and Gerda had permission to eat as many as she would. While she was eating them, the old woman combed out her long hair with a golden comb.
I've been long wishing for a dear little maiden like you, and now you must stay with me. How happily we'll live together.
And while she went on combing little Gerda's hair, the child thought less and less about her adopted brother Kay. The old woman was an enchantress, although she was not a wicked witch. She conjured only a little magic for her own amusement, and now she did magic because she wanted to keep Gerda. Therefore the enchantress went into the garden and stretched out her crutch toward all the rose trees. Beautiful though they were, they immediately sank into the dark earth, so that no one could tell where they had once stood. The old woman was afraid that if little Gerda saw roses, she would remember little Kay and run away. Then she took Gerda into the flower garden.
Oh, what a beautiful garden! So many flowers! No picture book could have more beautiful colors.
Gerda jumped for joy and played in the garden until the sun went down behind the tall cherry trees. The enchantress put Gerda in an elegant bed with red silk pillows embroidered with colored violets, and she dreamed as pleasantly as a young queen. The next day, and for many days after, Gerda played with the flowers in the warm sunshine. She made friends with every flower, though there were so many of them.
Still, I have the impression that one flower is missing, but I cannot tell which.
One day, however, as she sat looking at the old woman's hat with the painted flowers on it, she saw that the prettiest of them all was a rose. The old woman had forgotten to take it from her hat when she made all the roses sink into the earth. Usually, it is difficult to keep secrets, and one little mistake upsets all our arrangements.
What? Are there no roses here?
Gerda ran out into the garden and examined all the beds and searched and searched.
Roses. Roses. Where are you?
There was not one rose to be found. Then she sat down and wept.
There's no roses in this garden, not one!
Gerda's tears fell just on the place where one of the rose trees had sunk down. The warm tears moistened the earth, and the rose tree sprouted up at once, as blooming as when it had sunk.
Ah, here you are.
Gerda kissed the roses and thought of the beautiful roses at home, and with them of little Kay.
Oh, have I been detained? Oh, how I've been detained. I wanted to seek for little Kay to your roses. Do you know where he is? Do you think he's dead?
No, he is not dead. We have been in the ground where all the dead lie, but Kay is not there.
Thank you, dear roses. I'll try asking other flowers.
So the girl went and looked into little flowery cups and asked,
Do you know where little Kay is?
But each flower as it stood in the sunshine dreamed only of its own little fairy tale or history.
I know nothing of Kay. Who is it? You'd do better if you listened to the dream I dreamt that very night. Once a rat, a fir tree, and a rocket.
Gerda heard many stories from the flowers, but still she knew nothing of Kay. Then she ran to the other end of the garden. The door was fastened, but she pressed against the rusty latch, and it gave way. The door sprang open, and little Gerda ran out with bare feet into the wide world. Gerda looked back 3 times, but no one seemed to be following her.
I cannot run longer. I'm exhausted. I should rest a little.
So she sat down to rest on a great stone, and when she looked around, she saw that the summer was over and autumn very far advanced. She had known nothing of this in the beautiful garden where the sun shone and the flowers grew all the year round.
Oh, how I've wasted my time. It's autumn. I must not rest any longer.
So she rose to go on, but her little feet were soon wounded and sore.
The stones are so sharp on the roads of the wide world, and everything around me looks so cold and bleak. Leaves are all gone from the trees. Oh, how dark and weary this world is.
4th story, The Prince and Princess. Gerda was obliged to rest again, and saw a great raven come hopping toward her across the snow. He stood looking at her for some time and then wagged his head.
Caw, caw! Good day, good day! Where are you going, little girl? All alone in the wide world?
The word alone Gerda understood very well and felt that the raven wished to help her. So she told him the whole story of her life and adventures and asked him if he had seen little Kay.
Perhaps I have. It may be.
No! Do you really think you have?
Little Gerda was so happy that she kissed the raven and hugged him almost to death with joy.
Gently, gently. I believe I know. I think it may be little Kay. But I'm afraid he has forgotten you by this time. For the princess, I will explain as well as I can.
And he told her what he had heard.
In the kingdom where we now are, there lives a princess. She's so wonderfully clever that she has read all the newspapers in the world and forgotten them too. A short time ago, as she was sitting on her throne, and she began to sing a song.
Why should I not be married? Well, why not indeed?
So she determined to marry a husband who knew what to say when he was spoken to, and not one who could only look good, for that was so tiresome. She assembled all her court ladies at the beat of a drum, and when they heard of her intentions, they were very much pleased.
Ah, we are so glad to hear of it. We were talking about it ourselves.
You may believe every word I tell you, for I have a tame sweetheart who hops freely about the palace, and she told me all this. Then newspapers were published immediately with a border of hearts and the initials of the princess. Every handsome young man is free to visit the castle and speak with the princess. Those who could reply loud enough will make themselves quite at home at the palace, and the one who spoke best will be chosen as a husband for the princess. The people came in crowds. There was a great deal of crushing and running about, but no one succeeded either on the first or the second day. They could all speak very well while they were outside, but when they entered the palace and saw the guards in their silver uniforms and the footmen in their golden livery on the staircase and the great halls lighted up, they became quite confused. When they stood before the throne, they could do nothing but repeat the last words the princess had said.
Nice to meet you.
You can imagine she had no particular wish to hear her own words over again. It was just as if they had all taken something to make them sleepy while they were in the palace, for they did not recover themselves until they got back again into the street. There was a long procession of them, reaching from the town gates to the palace.
It must be Kay. Among the crowd?
Stop a bit. We are just coming to him. It was on the third day that there came marching cheerfully along to the palace a little boy without horses or carriage, his eyes sparkling like yours. He had beautiful long hair, but his clothes were very poor.
That was Kay! Oh, then I found him.
He had a little sack on his back.
No, it must have been on his sledge, for he went away with it.
It may have been so. I did not look at it very closely. But I know from my tame sweetheart the crow that he passed through the palace gates, saw the guards in their silver uniform, and the servants of liveries of gold on the stairs, but was not in the least embarrassed. It must be very tiresome to stand on the stairs. I prefer to go in. The rooms were blazing with light. Counselors and ambassadors walked around with bare feet, carrying golden vessels. It was enough to make anyone feel serious. His boots creaked loudly as he walked, and yet he was not at all uneasy.
It must be Kay. I know he had new boots on. I heard them creak in grandmother's room.
They really did creak. Yet he went boldly up to the princess herself, who was sitting on a pearl as large as a spinning wheel. And all the ladies of the courts were present with their maids, and all the cavaliers with their servants. And each of the maids had another maid to wait upon her, and the cavaliers' servants had their own servants as well as each a page.
It must be quite awful. But did Kay win the princess?
If I had not been her, I would have married her myself, though I am engaged. But the boy said he had not come to woo the princess, but to hear her wisdom, and he was as pleased with her as she was with him.
Oh, certainly that was Kay. He's so clever. He could work mental arithmetic and fractions. Oh, will you take me to the palace?
It is very easy to ask that. But how are we to manage it? However, I will speak about it to my tame sweetheart and ask her advice. It will be very difficult to gain permission for a little girl like you to enter the palace.
Oh, yes, but I will gain permission easily, for when Kay hears that I'm here, he will come out and fetch me immediately.
Then wait for me by the park hedge.
And he flew away. It was late in the evening before the raven returned.
Caw, caw! My tame sweetheart sends you greeting, and here is a little roll with bread. She thinks you must be hungry. You can't enter the palace by the front entrance. The guards in silver uniform and the servants in gold livery would not allow it. But do not cry. We will manage to get you in. My sweetheart knows a little back staircase that leads into the palace.
Then Gerda and the raven went into the garden through the great avenue where the leaves were falling one after another. They could see the lights in the palace being put out. Finally, the raven led little Gerda to a back door. Oh, how Gerda's heart beat with anxiety and longing. It was as if she were going to do something wrong, and yet she only wanted to know where little Kay was.
It must be little Kay, with those clear eyes and that long hair.
She already saw him smiling at her as he used to at home when they sat among the roses. He would certainly be glad to see her, and to hear what a long distance she had come for his sake, and to know how sorry they had all been at home because he did not come back. Oh, what joy, and yet what fear she felt. They were now on the stairs, and in a small closet at the top, a lamp was burning. In the middle of the floor stood the tame crow, turning her head from side to side and gazing at Gerda, who curtsied as her grandmother had taught her to do.
My betrothed has spoken so very highly of you, my little lady. Your story is very touching. If you will take the lamp, I will walk before you. We will go straight along this way, then we will meet no one.
After some minutes' walk, something rushed by Gerda like a shadow on the wall. It seemed to her that horses with flying manes and thin legs, hunters, ladies and gentlemen on horseback, glided by her like shadows.
I feel as if somebody were behind us.
They are only dreams. They are coming to carry the thoughts of the great people out hunting. All the better, for we will be able to look at them in their beds more safely.
They now came into the first hall, the walls of which were hung with rose-colored satin, embroidered with artificial flowers. Here the dreams again flitted by them, but so quickly that Gerda could not distinguish the royal persons. Each hall appeared more splendid than the last. It was enough to bewilder one. At length, they reached a bedroom. The ceiling was like a great palm tree, with glass leaves of the most costly crystal, and over the center of the floor, 2 beds, each resembling a lily, hung from a stem of gold. One, in which the princess lay, was white, the other was red, and in this, Gerda had to seek for little Kay. She pushed one of the red leaves aside and saw a little brown neck. Oh, that must be Kay.
Kay, my dear little Kay!
The girl called his name loudly and held the lamp over him. The dreams rushed back into the room on horseback. Prince woke and turned his head round.
What's the buzz?
It was not Kay. The prince was only like him, young and handsome. Out of her white lily bed peeped the princess.
What is the matter here?
Little Gerda wept and told her story, and all that the crows had done to help her.
You poor child, and you, dear raven, and my dearest crow, will be rewarded for the kindness you showed this poor girl.
But you will not invite anyone into our bedroom anymore.
Yes, Your Royal Highness.
This will not happen again, Your Royal Highness.
Would you like to have your freedom, my crows? Or would you prefer to be raised to the position of court crows, with all that is left in the kitchen for yourselves?
Then both the crows bowed.
We beg to have a position at court, Your Royal Highness. It would be so comfortable not to think about provisions all the time.
Then the prince got out of his bed and gave it up to Gerda.
It's time for you to have a rest, little one. You are tired, no doubt.
The girl truly could not do more, and she lay down.
How good everybody is to me, both men and animals.
Then she closed her eyes and fell into a sweet sleep. All the dreams came flying back again to her, looking like angels now, and one of them drew a little sledge on which sat Kay, who nodded to her.
Gerda, my dear Gerda.
But all this was only a dream. It vanished as soon as the girl woke up. The following day, Gerda was dressed from head to foot in silk and velvet. Prince and princess invited to stay at the palace, but she refused.
I am so grateful, Your Royal Highness, but I cannot stay, and I don't need silk dresses. I wish only for a pair of boots and a little carriage with a horse to draw it, so that I could go out into the wide world and seek for Kay.
Therefore, she obtained not only boots, but a muff, and was neatly dressed. When she was ready to go, there at the door she found a coach made of pure gold, with the coat of arms of the prince and princess shining upon it, like a star. The coachman, footmen, and outriders all were wearing golden crowns upon their heads. The prince and princess themselves helped Gerda into the coach.
I wish you to succeed in your quest, little girl.
You'll find yourself, little Kay.
The forest raven, who was now married, accompanied Gerda for the first 3 miles. He sat by her side as he could not bear riding backwards. The tame crow stood in the doorway flapping her wings. She could not go with them, because she had been suffering from headache ever since the new appointment, no doubt from overeating. The coach was well stored with sweet cakes, and under the seat were fruit and gingerbread nuts.
Farewell, farewell.
Farewell, little sweet Gerda.
The girl wept, and the raven wept, and then after a few miles, he also said farewell, and this parting was even sadder.
Farewell, my friend.
However, the raven flew to a tree and stood flapping his black wings as long as he could see the coach, which glittered like a sunbeam. 5th story. The Little Robber Girl. The coach drove on through a thick forest, where it lighted up the way like a torch and dazzled the eyes of some robbers who could not bear to let it pass.
It is gold! It is gold!
And they rushed forward and seized the horses.
Bruh, stay put. This is a hold-up.
The robbers threw out the little jockeys, the coachman, and the footmen. The old robber woman, who had a long beard and eyebrows that hung over her eyes, pulled little Gerda out of the carriage.
She is plump and pretty. She has been fed with the nuts. She is as good as a fattened lamb. How nice she will taste.
And as she said this, she drew forth a shining knife that glittered horribly, but she screamed at the same moment.
Oh, you naughty girl.
The old robber woman had not time to kill Gerda, for her own daughter, who held her back, had bitten her in the ear.
She will play with me. She will give me her muff and her pretty dress and sleep with me in my bed.
And then she bit her mother again.
Ouch!
I will have a ride in the coach.
The little robber girl always had her own way, for she was self-willed and obstinate. So she and Gerda seated themselves in the coach, and it drove away over stumps and stones into the depths of the forest. The little robber girl was about the same size as Gerda, but stronger. She had broader shoulders and darker skin. Her eyes were quite black, and she had a mournful look. She clasped like Gerda around the waist and said,
Don't you worry, they will not kill you as long as you don't make me vexed with you. You're a princess?
No, I'm not.
And Gerda told little robber girl all her history and how fond she was of Kay. The robber girl looked earnestly at her, nodded and said,
Fine, they shan't kill you even if I do get angry with you. Now stop crying.
And she wiped Gerda's eyes and put her own hands into the beautiful muff, which was so soft and warm. The coach stopped in the courtyard of a robber's castle, the walls of which were full of cracks from top to bottom. Ravens and crows flew in and out of the holes and crevices, while great dogs, each of them which looked as if it could swallow a man, were jumping about. They were not allowed to bark. In the large old smoky hall, a bright fire was burning on the stone floor. There was no chimney, so the smoke went up to the ceiling and found a way out for itself. The soup was boiling in a large cauldron, and hares and rabbits were roasting on the spit. After girls had had something to eat and drink, the little robber girl said,
Come, princess, you'll sleep with me and all my little animals tonight.
So she took Gerda to a corner of the hall where some straw and carpets were laid down. Above them, on laths and perches, were more than 100 pigeons. They all seemed to be asleep, though moved slightly when the two little girls came near them.
These all belong to me. Here, you can kiss it.
The robber girl seized the nearest pigeon, held it by the feet, and shook it until it flapped its wings.
There, in a cage, sit the wood pigeons. Both rascals would fly away directly if they were not closely locked up. And here is my old sweetheart.
And she dragged out a reindeer and a bright copper ring round his neck. The deer was fastened to the spot.
We're holding him too tight, or he'd just run away. I tickle his neck every evening with my sharp knife, which frightens him very much.
And the robber girl took a long knife from a chink in the wall and let it slide gently over the reindeer's neck. The poor animal began to kick, and the little robber girl laughed and pulled down Gerda into bed with her.
Will you take that knife into bed with you?
I always sleep with the knife by me. No one knows what may happen. But now tell me again all about little Kay and why you went out into the world.
Then Gerda repeated her story over again, while the wood pigeons in the cage over her cooed, and the other pigeons slept. The little robber girl put one arm across Gerda's neck and held the knife in the other, and was soon fast asleep and snoring. But Gerda could not close her eyes at all. She knew not whether she was to live or die. The robbers sat round the fire singing and drinking. Then the wood pigeon said to the girl,
Coo, coo. We have seen little Kay. A white bird carried his sledge, and he sat in the carriage of the Snow Queen, which drove through the wood while we were lying in our nest. She blew upon us, and all the young ones died except us two. Coo, coo.
What are you saying up there? Where was the Snow Queen going? Do you know anything about it?
She was most likely traveling to Lapland, where there is always snow and ice. Ask the reindeer. He must know all about it. Yes, there is always snow and ice. It's a glorious place. You can leap and run about freely on the sparkling icy plains. The Snow Queen has her summer tent there, but her strong castle is at the North Pole, on an island called Spitzbergen.
Okay, little Kay.
Lie still, or you will feel my knife.
In the morning, Gerda, the little robber girl, all that the wood pigeons had said. The little robber girl looked quite serious and nodded her head.
That's all talk. That is all talk. Hey, Bah, do you really know where Lapland is?
Who should know better than I do? I was born and brought up there, and used to run about the snow-covered plains.
Now listen, all our men are gone away. Only Mother is here, but at noon she always drinks out of a great bottle and sleeps a little. Then I'll do something for you.
Then the little robber girl jumped out of bed, clasped her mother around the neck, and pulled her by the beard, crying,
My own little nanny goat, good morning.
And her mother pinched her nose until it was quite red, yet she did it all for love. When the old robber woman had gone to sleep, the little robber maiden went to the reindeer.
I should like very much to tickle your neck a few times more with my knife, for it makes you look so funny. But never mind, I will untie your cord and set you free. Run away to your Lapland, but you must carry this little girl to the castle of the Snow Queen where her Kay is. You've heard what she told me, for she spoke loud enough, and you were listening.
The reindeer jumped for joy, and the little robber girl lifted Gerda on his back and gave her her own little cushion to sit upon.
Here are your fur boots for you, for it will be very cold, but I'll keep them off. It's so pretty. Here are my mother's large, warm mittens instead. They will reach up to your elbows. Let me put them on. There, now your hands look just like my mother's.
Gerda wept for joy.
Thank you so much. I don't like to see you fret. You ought to look quite happy now, and there are 2 loaves and a ham, so that you need not starve in Lapland.
These were fastened upon the reindeer, and then the little robber girl opened the door, coaxed in all the great dogs.
Come down.
Then she cut the string with which the reindeer was fastened with her sharp knife.
Now run, but mind you take good care of the little girl.
Gerda stretched out her hand toward the little robber girl.
Farewell.
And away flew the reindeer over stumps and stones, through the great forest, over marshes and plains, as quickly as he could. The wolves howled and the ravens screamed, while up in the sky quivered red lights like flames of fire.
There are my old northern lights. See how they flash?
And he ran on day and night, still faster and faster. But the loaves and the ham were all eaten by the time they reached Lapland. 6th story. The Lapland Woman and the Finland Woman. Gerda and the reindeer stopped at a little mean-looking hut. The roof sloped nearly down to the ground, and the door was so low that the family had to creep in on all fours. There was no one at home but an old Lapland woman. She was cutting fish by the light of an oil lamp. The reindeer told her his story, which seemed to him the most important, and only then Gerda's story. The girl was so pinched with the cold that she could not speak.
Oh, you poor things. You have a long way to go yet. You must travel more than 100 miles farther to Finland. The Snow Queen lives there now, and she burns Bengal lights every evening. I will write a few words on a dried stockfish, for I have no paper. You can take it from me to the Finland woman who lives there. She can give you better advice than I can.
So when Gerda was warmed and had taken something to eat and drink, the woman wrote a few words on the dried fish. Then she tied the girl again on the back of the reindeer, and he sprang high into the air and set off at full speed. Flash, flash went the beautiful blue northern lights the whole night long. Finally they reached Finland and knocked at the chimney of the Finland woman's hut, for it had no door above the ground. They crept in, but it was so terribly hot inside that the Finland woman wore scarcely any clothes.
Let me loosen your dress, little one. Let me take off your fur boots and mittens. I keep my house so warm one could easily faint from the heat.
Then she placed a piece of ice on the reindeer's head and read what was written on the dried fish. After she had read it 3 times, she knew it by heart, so she threw the fish into the soup cauldron. The Finland woman never wasted anything. The reindeer told his own story first, and then little Gerda's, and the Finland woman twinkled with her clever eyes but said nothing.
You are so clever. I know you can tie all the winds of the world with a piece of rope. If someone unties 1 knot, he has a fair wind. When he unties the 2nd, it blows hard. But if the 3rd and 4th are loosened, then comes a storm which will root up whole forests. Give this little girl something to make her as strong as 12 men to overcome the Snow Queen.
The power of 12 men. That would be very little use.
However, she went to a shelf and took down and unrolled a large skin scribbled with wonderful characters, and she read until the sweat ran down from her forehead. The reindeer begged so hard for little Gerda, and Gerda looked at the Finland woman with such tender, tearful eyes that her own eyes began to twinkle again. She drew the reindeer into a corner and whispered to him while she laid a fresh piece of ice on his head.
Little Kay is with the Snow Queen, but he finds everything there just beautiful. He believes it is the finest place in the world. This is because he has a piece of broken mirror in his heart and a little splinter of glass in his eye. These must be taken out or he will never be a human being again. The Snow Queen will hold him forever.
But can't you give little Gerda something to overcome the Snow Queen?
I can give her no greater power than she already has. Don't you see how strong she is? How men and animals serve her? How she has gotten through the world barefooted as she is? She cannot receive any power from me greater than she now has. That power is in her purity and innocence of heart. If she will not enter the Snow Queen Palace and remove the glass splinters from little Kay's heart and eye, we can do nothing to help her. 2 miles from here, the Snow Queen's garden begins. Carry the little girl there and set her down by the large bush covered with red berries. Do not stay gossiping. Come back here as quickly as you can.
Then the Finland woman lifted little Gerda upon the reindeer, and he ran away with her as quickly as he could. Very soon, Gerda felt the cutting cold.
Oh, I've forgotten my boots and my mittens.
The reindeer dared not stop, and ran on until he reached the bush with the red berries. Here he set Gerda down, and he kissed her.
Here I must leave you.
The great bright tear trickled over the animal's cheek, but he left her and ran back as fast as he could. There stood poor Gerda, without shoes, without gloves, in the middle of cold, dreary, ice-bound Finland. She ran forward as quickly as she could when a swarm of snowflakes came on her. They did not, however, fall from the sky, which was quite clear and glittered with the northern lights.
Oh, horrid snowflakes. I remember how large and beautiful they looked through the Kay's burning glass. But these are really larger and much more terrible. They seem to be alive.
The snowflakes were the guards of the Snow Queen and had the strangest shapes. Some were like great porcupines, others like twisted serpents with their heads stretching out, and some were like little fat bears with their hair bristled.
Get away, little girl. You will never enter the palace. You will never see little Kay.
Then Gerda repeated the Lord's Prayer. The cold was so great that she could see her own breath come out of her mouth like steam as she uttered the words. The steam appeared to increase as she continued her prayer until it took the shape of little angels who grew larger the moment they touched the earth. They all wore helmets on their heads and carried spears and shields. By the time Gerda had finished her prayers, a whole legion stood round her. The angels thrust her spears into the terrible snowflakes so that they broke into 100 pieces, and little Gerda could go forward. But now we must see what Kay is doing. In truth, he thought not of little Gerda, and least of all, that she could be standing at the gates of the palace. Seventh story. The Palace of the Snow Queen and what happened there. The walls of the palace were formed of drifted snow and the windows and doors of cutting winds. There were more than 100 rooms in it, all as if they had been formed of snow blown together. The largest of them extended for several miles. They were all lighted up by the vivid light of the aurora, and were so large and empty, so icy cold and glittering. There were no amusements here, not even a little bear's ball, when the storm might have been the music, and the bears could have danced on their hind legs and shown their good manners. There were no pleasant games of snapdragon or touch, nor even a gossip over the tea table for the young lady foxes. Empty, vast, and cold were the halls of the Snow Queen. The flickering flames of the northern lights could be plainly seen from every part of the castle. In the middle of this empty, endless hall of snow was a frozen lake, broken on its surface into 1,000 forms. Each piece resembled another because each was itself perfect as a work of art. And in the center of this lake sat the Snow Queen when she was at home. She called the lake the Mere of Reason and said that it was the best mere in the world. Little Kay was quite blue with cold.
Are you cold, my little Kay? I did not feel any cold, my queen. I feel nothing.
There's my boy.
The Snow Queen had kissed away the icy shiverings, and his heart was already a lump of ice. he dragged some sharp, flat pieces of ice to and fro and placed them together in all kinds of positions, as if he wished to complete a puzzle.
What are you doing, my little Kay?
I am playing the icy game of reason. Today I will create a remarkable figure.
Kay's figures were very artistic, and in his eyes, very remarkable, and of the highest importance because the splinter of glass was still sticking in his eye. He composed many complete figures, forming different words, but there was one word he never could manage to form, although he wished it very much.
I almost did it, but it wouldn't form. It just wouldn't form. I cannot form the word eternity.
Calm down, my little Kay. All in good time. When you form this word, you will be your own master, and I'll give you the whole world and a new pair of skates.
But Kay could not accomplish it.
Don't be sad, my little Kay. Now I must hurry to warmer countries. I will look into the black craters of the tops of the burning mountains, Etna and Vesuvius. I will whiten them for their own good, and for the good of lemons and grapes.
And away flew the Snow Queen, leaving little Kay quite alone in the great hall. He sat and looked at his pieces of ice, and was thinking so deeply, and sat so still that anyone might have supposed he was frozen. Just at this moment, it happened that little Gerda came through the great door of the castle. Cutting winds were raging around her, but she offered up a prayer, and the winds sank down as if they were going to sleep. On she went until she came to the large empty hall and saw Kay. She knew him directly, flew to him, and threw her arms around his neck.
Oh, Kay, finally I found you. Let's get out of here quick.
But he sat quite still, stiff and cold. Then little Gerda wept hot tears.
Kay, dear little Kay.
Gerda's hot tears fell on Kay's breast and went into his heart and warmed the lump of ice and washed away the little piece of glass. Then he looked at Gerda and she sang,
Roses bloom and fade away, but our love will bloom always.
Then Kay burst into tears. He wept so that the splinter of glass swam out of his eye. Then he recognized Gerda.
Gerda, dear little Gerda, where have you been all this time, and where have I been?
And he looked all around him.
How cold it is, how large and empty it all looks.
Then he clung to Gerda, and she laughed and wept for joy. It was so pleasing to see the children so happy that even the pieces of ice danced. When they were tired and went to lie down, they formed into the letters of the word which the Snow Queen asked Kay to form before he could be his own master and have the whole world in a pair of new skates. Gerda kissed Kay's cheeks, and they became blooming. She kissed his eyes until they shone like her own, and he became quite healthy and cheerful.
There now, finally you look like your old self.
The Snow Queen might come home now, for there lay Kay's certainty of freedom in the word she wanted, written in shining letters of ice. Kay and Gerda took each other by the hand and left from the great palace of ice.
Do you remember the roses on our roof?
And you, our dear old grandmother?
As they went on, the winds were at rest, and the sun burst forth. When they arrived at the bush with red berries, there stood the reindeer waiting for them.
Gerda, Gerda, you have found your Kay. Hooray! I'm so happy. Look who's here with me.
He had brought another young reindeer with him, whose udders were full, and the children drank her warm milk. Both the reindeer carried Kay and Gerda first to the Finland woman, where they warmed themselves thoroughly in the hot room. Next, they went to the Lapland woman, who had made some new clothes for them and put their sleighs in order. The reindeer ran by their side and followed them as far as the boundaries of the country, where the first green leaves were budding. And her children took leave of the reindeer and the Lapland woman.
Farewell, my dear friends. Thank you for your help.
Then birds began to twitter, and the forest was full of green young leaves, and out of it came a beautiful horse, which Gerda remembered, for it was one which had drawn the golden coach. A young girl was riding upon it, with a shining red cap on her head and pistols in her belt. It was the little robber girl who had got tired of staying at home. She was going first to the north, and if that did not suit her, she meant to try some other part of the world. She knew Gerda directly, and Gerda remembered her. It was a joyful meeting.
So you're Kay? You're a fine fellow to go gadding about in this way. I should like to know whether you deserve that anyone should go to the end of the world to find you. Don't be so harsh on him. Tell us about the prince and princess. How are they? They They're gone to foreign countries. And the crows? Oh, the crow is dead. His tame sweetheart is now a widow and wears a bit of black worsted around her leg. She mourns very pitifully, but it's all staff. But now tell me how you managed to get Kay back.
Then Gerda and Kay told her all about it.
Snip, snap, snurr. It's all right at last.
She took both their hands and promised that if ever she should pass through the town, she would call on them. And then she rode away into the wide world. But Gerda and Kay went hand in hand toward home. And as they advanced, spring appeared more lovely with the green leaves and beautiful flowers. Very soon, the children recognized the large town where they lived, and the tall steeples of the churches in which the sweet bells were ringing. As they entered it and found their way to their grandmother's door, they went upstairs into the little room, where all looked just as it used to. The old clock was tickling, and the hands pointed to the time of day. But as they passed through the door into the room, they saw that they were both grown up. The roses out on the roof were in full bloom and peeped in at the window. And there stood the little chairs in which they had sat when children. Kay and Gerda seated themselves each on their own chair and took each other by the hand, and then the cold, empty grandeur of the Snow Queen's palace vanished from their memories like a painful dream. The grandmother sat in bright sunshine, and she read aloud from the book.
Except you become as little children, you will not enter into the kingdom of God.
Kay and Gerda looked into each other's eyes, and all at once understood the words of the old song.
Roses bloom and fade away, but our love will shine always.
And they both sat there, grown up, yet children at heart. And it was summer, warm, beautiful summer.